A quiet black hairstylist moved gracefully in the background of a lavish wedding. She was a shadow among the glittering chaos, a humble presence in a room full of noise and vanity. But this was all about to change. The arrogant bride, a woman wrapped in silk and self-importance, turned and shrieked, her voice a whip cracking through the air. "Ugly hands can't fix my hair," she screamed for all the stunned guests to hear. The hairstylist didn't flinch. She stood her ground, a silent pillar of dignity. But she wasn't just anyone. She held a secret power that no one in that room could possibly imagine. She was the groom's second mother, the woman who had pulled him from the wreckage of his childhood and raised him as her own. And when the truth of who she was came out, jaws would drop. The bride's perfect world would not just crack, it would shatter into a million pieces. And the moral of this story would be one that no one would ever forget. Before we find out what happens next, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story already has you on edge, hit that like button, because this one gets intense. The bridal suite of the Grand Oak Manor was a storm of white lace, shimmering champagne, and rising anxiety. Sunlight poured through the tall arched windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, frantic fairies. In the center of this whirlwind was Samantha Miller, the bride. She sat on a plush velvet stool, a silk robe loosely tied around her waist, her face a mask of carefully applied makeup. But beneath the perfect foundation and expertly drawn eyeliner, a tempest was brewing. Her eyes, cold and sharp, were fixed on the reflection in the ornate mirror before her. They weren't looking at her own face. They were aimed at the woman standing behind her. Angela Carter worked with a quiet focus, her hands moving with the practiced ease of a master. Her fingers, weathered and calloused from years of hard work, gently combed through Samantha's long blonde hair. Each movement was precise, each pin placed with intention. Angela wasn't just a hairstylist, she was an artist, and this bride's hair was her canvas. But Samantha didn't see an artist. She saw something else entirely. She saw hands that were not manicured, not soft, not decorated with expensive rings. She saw the hands of a worker, and in her world that was a mark of inferiority. The tension in the room had been building for an hour. Samantha had been snapping at the makeup artist, complaining about the temperature of her champagne, and sighing with dramatic impatience every few minutes. The bridesmaids, a flock of young women in matching pink robes, whispered nervously in the corners, trying to stay out of the bride's line of fire. Emily Ross, a junior bridesmaid and a college friend of the groom, Michael, watched with a growing sense of unease. She had never liked Samantha, finding her to be shallow and cruel, but today Samantha was operating on a different level of monstrousness. The breaking point came with a single misplaced hairpin. Angela had been trying to secure a difficult curl, and the pin didn't go in as smoothly as she'd hoped. It was a minor, almost imperceptible hiccup. But for Samantha, it was an unforgivable sin. She flinched as if she'd been stabbed. Her head whipped around, her eyes locking onto Angela's. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed, her voice low and venomous. Angela's hands froze midair. She met Samantha's gaze in the mirror, her expression calm. "I'm sorry. Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice soft and even. The quiet dignity in her tone seemed only to fuel Samantha's rage. It was like pouring gasoline on a bonfire. Samantha shot up from the stool, her silk robe falling open slightly. She turned to face Angela directly, her perfectly painted face twisted into a sneer of pure disgust. The room fell silent. The bridesmaids stopped whispering. The makeup artist paused, her brush hovering over a palette of eyeshadows. Every eye was on the bride. "Is something wrong?" Samantha mimicked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Then she screamed. It was a raw, ugly sound that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. "Everything is wrong! Look at these hands!" She pointed a perfectly manicured, diamond-clad finger at Angela's hands. "They're rough. They're ugly. ugly hands can't fix my hair." A collective gasp went through the room. The sound was sharp, a sudden intake of breath from a dozen different lungs. A few of the bridesmaids exchanged horrified glances. Emily's stomach clenched. This was worse than she could have imagined. This wasn't just bridezilla behavior. This was pure, unadulterated cruelty. Angela stood perfectly still. Not a muscle in her face moved. She simply looked at Samantha, her dark eyes holding a depth of emotion that the bride could never hope to understand. There was hurt there, yes, but it was buried deep beneath layers of resilience and strength. She had faced worse than the spoiled tantrum of a privileged young woman. So much worse. But Samantha wasn't finished. The shock of the onlookers seemed to egg her on, feeding her sense of power. "Who even let you in here?" she continued, her voice rising with each word. "You look like you should be scrubbing the floors, not touching a bride on her wedding day. I specifically requested the best, and they send me this? Why is the cleaning lady touching my hair?" The insult hung in the air, thick and poisonous. The word cleaning lady was delivered with such contempt, such dismissive scorn, that it felt like a physical blow. The makeup artist subtly backed away, trying to make herself smaller. The wedding coordinator, who had been hovering by the door, looked pale and flustered. She opened her mouth to speak, to intervene, but Samantha shot her a look so venomous that the words died in her throat. Angela Carter remained silent. She did not defend herself. She did not argue. She simply stood there, a pillar of quiet grace in the face of a hurricane of hate. The guests and vendors who had gathered in the hallway, drawn by the shouting, were now peering into the room, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. They saw a screaming bride, a frozen hairstylist, and a room full of people too stunned or too scared to do anything. They were all witnesses to a profound act of humiliation, a moment of sharp, intentional cruelty. And the groom, the one person who could stop it, was nowhere to be seen. The silence that followed the scream was deafening, a heavy blanket of disbelief that smothered the entire room. Everyone just waited, their jaws on the floor, wondering what could possibly happen next. Samantha's chest was heaving, her face flushed with a mixture of rage and triumph. She felt the power coursing through her. The silence of the room was her validation. In her mind, she had asserted her dominance, putting an inferior in her place on the most important day of her life. She was the bride, the queen of this day, and her word was law. Seeing Angela's stoic silence, however, only infuriated her more. She wanted a reaction. She wanted tears. She wanted begging. The hairstylist's unshakable dignity felt like a personal challenge. "Are you deaf?" Samantha spat, taking a step closer to Angela. Her voice was a low growl now, laced with menace. "I said get out. Your services are no longer required." She then did something that sent a fresh wave of shock through the room. With a flick of her foot, clad in a delicate, high-heeled slipper, she kicked the small rolling cart that held Angela's hairstyling tools. The cart tipped over with a loud crash. Combs, brushes, hairpins, and bottles of hairspray scattered across the polished hardwood floor. The clattering metallic sound was violent and jarring, an exclamation point on Samantha's cruelty. Several of the bridesmaids flinched. Emily Ross felt a surge of nausea. This was a new level of viciousness. It was one thing to be verbally abusive, but to physically lash out, to destroy someone's tools of their trade, that was something else entirely. It was an act of profound disrespect. "Security!" Samantha shrieked, turning her head towards the door where the wedding coordinator was standing, frozen in horror. "Get security in here now. I want this woman removed from the premises. She's trespassing." The wedding coordinator, a woman named Helen, finally found her voice, though it was shaky. "Samantha, please, let's just calm down. Perhaps we can find another stylist." "I don't want another stylist," Samantha cut her off, her voice cracking with fury. "I want her gone, now." Are you going to do your job, or do I need to speak to your manager? Helen, clearly intimidated, nodded quickly and scurried out of the room, her face pale. She knew challenging a bride like Samantha was a losing battle, and her job was to ensure the wedding went smoothly, even if it meant enabling monstrous behavior. The vendors in the room, the makeup artist, and a nail technician, began to pack up their things, their movements quick and quiet. They wanted no part of this. They kept their heads down, avoiding eye contact with anyone, their faces tight with discomfort. They were hired help just like Angela, and they knew their place. Speaking up would cost them their jobs and their reputation. Amid the chaos, Angela Carter finally moved. She didn't look at Samantha. She didn't look at the shocked faces around her. With a deep, steadying breath, she bent down. Her movements were slow, deliberate, and full of a quiet grace that seemed to defy the ugliness of the moment. One by one, she began to pick up her scattered tools. She wiped a smudge of dust off a silver comb with her thumb. She carefully recapped a bottle of hairspray. She gathered the spilled hairpins into the palm of her hand. Her silence was more powerful than any shout could have been. It was a testament to a strength that Samantha, with all her money and privilege, could never possess. This silent refusal to be broken was the ultimate insult to Samantha. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "I told you to get out. Don't touch that filthy stuff in my bridal suite." Samantha's rage was escalating into a full-blown hysteria. She wanted Angela to crumble, but the woman was acting as if she hadn't heard a word. Before security could arrive, Emily Ross could no longer stand it. Her heart was pounding in her chest. She looked at Angela, picking up her things with such dignity, and then at Samantha, who was practically vibrating with hate. Emily knew she couldn't confront Samantha directly. It would only make things worse and get her thrown out as well. But she couldn't do nothing. She whispered to the bridesmaid next to her, a girl named Chloe. "This is horrible," Emily breathed, her voice trembling slightly. "This feels so wrong." Chloe just nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "I know," she whispered back. "But what can we do?" "It's her day." "Her day to be a monster?" Emily retorted, her voice low but sharp with indignation. The hesitation from the security guards, who had just appeared at the doorway looking confused and reluctant, gave her an idea. She knew the groom, Michael. She knew he wasn't like this. He was kind, generous, and had a strong sense of justice. He would never condone this behavior. He needed to know what was happening. As Angela finally stood up, her tools back in her case, she gave a single, small nod towards the room, a silent acknowledgement of the situation, and then turned to leave. Her back was straight, her head held high. She walked past the hesitating security guards without a word, her composure utterly intact. Her exit was so graceful, so full of quiet power. It left Samantha fuming, denied the dramatic, tearful scene she had craved. The bride was left standing in the middle of the room, a queen on a battlefield where her enemy had simply refused to fight. Behind the silence, behind the calm exterior Angela Carter presented to the world, was a life story forged in fire and sacrifice. Her story was not one of wealth or privilege, but of love, resilience, and an unbreakable will. Years ago, long before Michael Thompson was a successful businessman on the verge of becoming a millionaire, he was just a boy. A 10-year-old boy with eyes that had seen too much, his world shattered by a tragedy that stole both of his parents in a single cruel instant. A car accident on a rainy Tuesday afternoon had left him an orphan, alone and adrift in a world that suddenly felt cold and frightening. He had distant relatives, an aunt and an uncle who lived states away, but they were strangers to him. They had their own lives, their own children, and taking in a traumatized young boy was a burden they were not eager to bear. For a few terrifying weeks, Michael's future hung in the balance, a question mark hovering over the drab, sterile offices of social services. He was quiet, withdrawn, a small shadow of the happy boy he used to be. That was when Angela Carter stepped in. She wasn't a relative. She wasn't a close family friend. She was the woman who cleaned the office building where Michael's father had worked. She had known Mr. Thompson for years, not as a boss, but as the kind man who always remembered her name, who always asked about her children, who left a generous tip for the cleaning staff every Christmas. She had seen pictures of Michael on his desk, a smiling boy with a bright, gap-toothed grin. When she heard about the accident and later heard the office gossip about the orphan son, something in her heart broke. She couldn't bear the thought of that smiling boy being lost in the system. Angela was a single mother herself, already raising 2 children of her own in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment. She didn't have much. Her life was a constant struggle, a relentless cycle of working and sleeping just to make ends meet. But she had a wealth of something far more valuable than money. She had love. She went to social services, a small, determined woman with worn-out shoes and a fire in her eyes, and she made her case. She offered to become Michael's foster mother. The caseworkers were skeptical at first. She didn't have the space. She didn't have the income. But she had something they couldn't quantify, a fierce, unwavering commitment. She promised them she would work. She would provide. She would love that boy as if he were her own. And she did. Angela took on a second job, then a third. Her days became a blur of exhausting labor. In the mornings, she was a maid, scrubbing the floors and toilets of wealthy families in sprawling suburban homes. In the afternoons and evenings, she was a waitress at a greasy spoon diner, on her feet for hours, carrying heavy trays and smiling through her exhaustion. And late at night, when the city was quiet, she was a janitor, pushing a mop and a bucket through the empty, silent corridors of the same office building where Michael's father had once worked. She worked until her bones ached and her muscles screamed in protest. She came home long after her own children were asleep, her hands raw and chapped from cleaning chemicals, the smell of bleach and floor polish clinging to her clothes. But no matter how tired she was, she always tiptoed into the small room that Michael now shared with her son. She would stand by his bed and watch him sleep, her heart swelling with a fierce, protective love. She would make sure his homework was done, that his clothes for the next day were clean, that there was food in the refrigerator for his breakfast. It was her hard work, her calloused, ugly hands that paid for his food, his clothes, his school supplies. It was her sacrifice that allowed him to join the school basketball team, to go on field trips, to have a semblance of a normal childhood. She never complained. She never made him feel like a burden. She simply loved him. She was the one who sat with him when he had nightmares, who held him when he cried for his parents. She was the one who taught him how to be strong, how to be kind, how to be a man of integrity. She was the reason he studied so hard, the reason he got a scholarship to a good college, the reason he built a successful business from the ground up. Michael never forgot it. To him, Angela wasn't his foster mother. She was his mother. Period. She was the rock upon which his entire life was built. Now, as a respected businessman, he had offered to give her anything she wanted, a new house, a car, a life of leisure. But Angela had always refused. She was a humble woman, proud of her independence. She didn't want his money. All she wanted was his happiness. When Michael had announced his engagement to Samantha, Angela had her reservations. She found the young woman to be cold and obsessed with appearances. But she kept her doubts to herself, wanting only to support the son she adored. She had offered to do Samantha's hair for the wedding as a quiet, personal gift, a gesture of love from a mother to her new daughter-in-law. It was her way of weaving her love and blessings directly into this new chapter of his life. She had no idea that this simple act of love would be met with such venomous contempt. Angela's decision to keep her identity a secret was not born of shame or fear. It was a deliberate choice, a quiet test of character. From the moment Michael had introduced her to Samantha, Angela had sensed a profound lack of depth in the young woman. Samantha was all surface. Her conversations revolved around brands, status, and the appearances of wealth. She judged people not by the content of their character, but by the label on their clothes or the car they drove. Angela had seen this type of person before in the big houses she used to clean. She recognized the proprietary arrogance, the casual cruelty disguised as high standards. She knew that if she were introduced as Michael's mother, Samantha would have treated her with a manufactured, superficial respect. She would have been all smiles and saccharine compliments, not out of genuine warmth, but because Angela held a position of importance in Michael's life. It would have been a performance, a strategic move to stay in the good graces of her wealthy fiancé. And Angela wasn't interested in a performance. She was interested in the truth. Angela had a simple but profound belief, one she had instilled in Michael from a young age. You can always judge the true character of a person by how they treat those they believe can do nothing for them. It was a lesson she had learned over a lifetime of being the help. She had seen people at their best and at their absolute worst. She had seen wealthy employers who treated her with kindness and dignity, who knew the names of her children and asked about her well-being. And she had seen others who looked right through her, who spoke to her as if she were an inanimate object, a piece of furniture that just happened to be able to scrub a floor. She wanted to know, for Michael's sake, which kind of person Samantha truly was. Was her heart as polished and perfect as her designer handbags? Or was there something cold and empty beneath the glittering facade? So she made a quiet request to Michael. "Let me meet her on my own terms first," she had said to him a few months before the wedding. "Don't tell her who I am. Just let her know I'm a hairstylist you recommend." Michael had been hesitant. He loved Angela fiercely and was deeply protective of her. He couldn't stand the thought of anyone disrespecting her. "Mom, why?" he had asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "You shouldn't have to hide. You should be honored." "It's not about hiding, sweetie," Angela had explained, her voice calm and wise. "It's about seeing. I need to see who she really is, for you. A marriage is built on character, not on bank accounts. I want to see her character when she thinks no one important is watching." Reluctantly, Michael had agreed. He trusted Angela's wisdom implicitly. He knew she saw things in people that he often missed. So the arrangement was made. Angela was hired as the hairstylist for the wedding, just another vendor on a long list. She had hoped, truly hoped, that Samantha would surprise her. She had prayed that beneath the brittle exterior, there was a good person, a woman worthy of the incredible man Michael had become. She had wanted to be proven wrong about her initial assessment. She wanted to be able to go to Michael after the wedding and say, "You've chosen well. She has a good heart." But as she stood in that bridal suite, as Samantha's hateful words echoed in the silent room, Angela got her answer. It was not the answer she had hoped for, but it was the one she had suspected all along. Samantha's character was not just flawed, it was rotten to the core. She had failed the test in the most spectacular way imaginable. Angela felt a deep, profound sadness, not for herself. She was beyond being wounded by such petty cruelty. But for Michael. Her heart ached for the pain he was about to endure, the painful truth he would have to face about the woman he was about to marry. Her silence in that moment was not weakness. It was the quiet, somber acceptance of a truth that had been laid bare. She had allowed Samantha's arrogance to show itself in full, unrestrained force, and now the consequences of that revelation were about to unfold. Emily Ross stood near the refreshment table, her hands trembling so badly that the champagne flute she was holding sloshed its contents onto the pristine white tablecloth. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. The image of Angela on her knees, calmly picking up her scattered tools while Samantha hurled insults at her, was seared into her mind. It was the ugliest display of human behavior she had ever witnessed firsthand. A part of her screamed to run after Angela, to offer her a word of comfort, to tell her that not everyone in that room was as vile as the bride. But another part, a colder, more pragmatic part, held her back. She knew Samantha. They weren't close friends. Emily was here because of her long-standing friendship with Michael. She had known him since their freshman year of college, and she considered him one of the best people she had ever met. She had watched him date Samantha for 2 years, always with a sense of quiet reservation. Samantha was possessive, manipulative, and had a cruel streak that she usually kept veiled behind a thin layer of social niceties. Today that veil had been torn to shreds. Emily's dilemma was sharp and painful. To speak up now would be to invite Samantha's wrath upon herself. Samantha was ruthless and vindictive. She would not only have Emily thrown out of the wedding, but she would also make it her mission to ruin Emily's social standing. She would spread rumors, turn mutual friends against her, and make her life a living hell. Emily was just starting her career, and Samantha's family was well connected. Crossing her could have real, tangible consequences. Silence seemed like the safest option, the path of least resistance. But then she thought of Michael, kind, loyal, honorable Michael, the man who had once driven 6 hours in a snowstorm to help her when her car broke down. The man who had tutored her in economics for an entire semester, never asking for anything in return. The man who, she knew, would be utterly devastated if he knew how the woman he loved had treated another human being. To stay silent would be to betray her friendship with him. It would be a cowardly act, and Emily wouldn't be able to live with herself. Silence would make her complicit in Samantha's cruelty. She looked around the room. The other bridesmaids were already starting to regroup around Samantha, offering her water, fanning her face, murmuring soothing words as if she were the victim. They were choosing their side, aligning with power. The sight of it filled Emily with a cold disgust. She knew she had to do something, but a direct confrontation was pointless. It would be her word against the bride and her sycophantic followers. She needed proof. Her eyes darted to her small clutch purse lying on a nearby chair. Inside was her phone. An idea, sharp and sudden, took hold of her. It was risky, but it was the only way. As Samantha began a fresh tirade, this time directed at the wedding coordinator who had returned with 2 burly but hesitant security guards, Emily moved. Her actions were swift and discreet. She pretended to be checking her makeup in her purse, and with trembling fingers, she unlocked her phone and opened the camera app. She switched it to video mode. Hiding the phone in the palm of her hand, angled just right, she pressed the record button. The small red light was a beacon of rebellion in the toxic atmosphere of the room. She captured the tail end of Samantha's rant about Angela, her voice still shrill and full of contempt. "And tell all the other vendors," Samantha was saying, her voice laced with venom, "that if they have a problem with my standards, they can follow that woman right out the door. This is my wedding, and I will have perfection. I will not have it tainted by incompetence and filth." Emily kept recording as Samantha then turned her attention to her bridesmaids, a triumphant, cruel smile playing on her lips. She was bragging, preening, relishing her victory. Emily captured it all. The arrogant toss of Samantha's head, the nervous, forced laughter of the other women, the palpable tension that hung in the air. Her heart pounded with the fear of being caught, but she held the phone steady. She was no longer just a bystander. She was a witness, gathering evidence. She didn't know exactly how she would use it, but she knew she had to have it. She had to have irrefutable proof of what had happened in this room, for Angela, and most of all for Michael. When she felt she had captured enough, she discreetly stopped the recording and slipped the phone back into her purse. A small sense of resolve settled over her. She had made her choice. She would not be silent. When the time was right, she would stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. With Angela gone, a strange and unsettling calm descended upon the bridal suite. But it was the calm of a battlefield after a brutal skirmish. Samantha, feeling victorious, plopped back down in her styling chair as if nothing had happened. A replacement hairstylist, a young, visibly nervous woman who'd been working on the bride's mother, was hastily summoned. Samantha watched her with hawk-like intensity, her every instruction clipped and demanding. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Samantha, however, seemed completely oblivious to it. Or perhaps she simply didn't care. She picked up her glass of champagne, took a long, theatrical sip, and turned to her bridesmaids, who were gathered around her like ladies-in-waiting to a tyrannical queen. "Can you believe the nerve of some people?" she began, her voice light and conversational, a stark contrast to the shrieking fury of moments before. "Honestly, where do they find these people? She probably lied on her resume." A few of the bridesmaids offered weak, non-committal murmurs of agreement. They were walking on eggshells, terrified of setting Samantha off again. But Samantha didn't need their enthusiastic support. She was performing a monologue for her own benefit, rewriting the narrative of the event to cast herself as the wronged party. "It's about standards," she continued, gesturing expansively with her champagne flute. "Michael's family and my family are some of the most important people in this city. Everything today has to be perfect, impeccable, and I will not have someone with hands like that, representing us. It's a reflection of our taste, our class." She laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of any real humor. "I'm sure she's a perfectly good floor scrubber, but my hair, please." Emily watched this performance with a growing sense of revulsion. Samantha wasn't just cruel. She was delusional, living in a bubble of privilege so thick that she couldn't see the ugliness of her own behavior. She was boasting about her cruelty, framing it as a necessary act of quality control. She was mocking Angela, a woman she didn't know, a woman whose only crime was to have hands that showed a lifetime of honest work. The other bridesmaids forced nervous chuckles, their eyes darting around the room, anywhere but at Samantha, anywhere but at each other. Their complicity was a quiet poison, seeping into the air. One bridesmaid, Jessica, a cousin of Samantha's, made the mistake of trying to be diplomatic. "Well, it's all sorted now, Sam," she said gently. "The new stylist is doing a wonderful job. Let's just focus on the happy part. You're getting married." Samantha's eyes snapped to Jessica, a flicker of ice in her gaze. "Of course it's sorted," she said, her voice dropping a little. "Because I sorted it. You have to be strong in this life, Jessica. You have to be willing to put the help in their place, otherwise they'll walk all over you. It's a lesson you should learn." The implied threat was clear. "Fall in line, or you'll be next." Jessica paled and nodded, quickly looking down at her manicured nails. The lesson had been received. Samantha, feeling she had re-established her dominance, then launched into a full-blown mockery of Angela. She mimicked Angela's quiet demeanor, her calm voice, twisting it into something she portrayed as weakness or stupidity. "And she just stood there," Samantha said, widening her eyes in a parody of innocence. "Didn't say a word, like a little mouse. Probably couldn't even speak English properly. This was a blatant, ugly lie. But Samantha didn't care. She was on a roll, her arrogance feeding on itself. The room felt smaller, the air more suffocating. Emily felt a desperate need to get out, to breathe air that wasn't tainted by Samantha's poison. She made a quiet excuse about needing to check on the flower arrangements and slipped out of the room. In the hallway, she leaned against the cool wall, taking deep, ragged breaths. She could still hear Samantha's cruel laughter through the door. The sound made her skin crawl. Samantha felt powerful. She felt untouchable. She had no idea that her words, her boasts, her champagne-fueled cruelty had been captured. She had no idea that in her moment of triumph, she was simply digging her own grave, one arrogant, hateful word at a time. The storm was coming, and Samantha was basking in the sunshine, completely blissfully unaware of the destruction that was headed her way. Samantha's tirade was not limited to the absent hairstylist. Now that she had tasted blood, her appetite for cruelty was insatiable. She had created an audience of captive, terrified bridesmaids, and she was going to perform. As the new hairstylist finished her work, Samantha began to find fault with everything and everyone around her. Her overconfidence had morphed into a kind of manic tyranny. A young waitress entered the suite carrying a tray of fresh mimosas. She was a teenager, probably working her first big event, and her hands were trembling slightly as she offered a glass to the bride. "Your drink, Ms. Miller," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Samantha didn't even look at her. She waved a dismissive hand in the waitress's direction. "Put it on the table, and be quick about it. You're letting a draft in." The girl, flustered, nearly dropped the tray. She placed the drink down and scurried out of the room, her face burning with humiliation. Samantha smirked. "So slow," she commented to the room at large. "You'd think they'd hire people who could actually walk and carry something at the same time." Next, her ire fell upon the junior florist who had come to deliver the bridesmaids' bouquets. The young woman was proudly holding a beautiful arrangement of peonies and roses. "Here are the bouquets, Miss Miller," she said with a bright smile. Samantha glanced at them, her nose wrinkling in distaste. "Are these the final ones?" "The peonies look a little wilted. I specifically said I wanted them to be fresh, vibrant. These look sad." The florist's smile faltered. "Oh, I'm sorry you feel that way," she stammered. "They were delivered this morning. I think they look lovely." "Well, you're not the one paying the bill, are you?" Samantha snapped. "Take them away and see if you can find some that don't look like they were pulled from a compost heap. Go on." The florist, her eyes welling with tears, backed out of the room, clutching the beautiful rejected bouquets to her chest. This pattern of degradation continued. She called the maid who came to clean up the spilled champagne, slow and useless. She loudly questioned whether the makeup artist had sanitized her brushes properly. Each comment was a small, public execution, designed to assert her superiority and remind everyone in her orbit that they were beneath her. The bridesmaids just sat in stunned silence, their own expensive dresses and carefully applied makeup feeling like a costume in a horror movie. This wasn't a wedding celebration. It was a hostage situation. Meanwhile, Angela Carter had not gone far. She had found a small, quiet alcove in a deserted hallway, far from the chaos of the bridal suite. She sat on a padded bench, her hands resting on the case that held her tools. Her heart was heavy, not with self-pity, but with a deep, aching sorrow for Michael. She had seen the truth, and it was uglier than she had imagined. She knew what she had to do, but the thought of it brought her no joy. The thought of breaking her son's heart was a pain far sharper than any insult Samantha could ever hurl at her. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and centered herself. She was a woman of immense strength, and she would need every ounce of it for what was to come. Her dignity was a shield, and it remained unbreached. Emily, having escaped the toxic atmosphere of the bridal suite, wandered the halls, her mind racing. She felt like a co-conspirator, a spy holding a vital piece of intelligence. She saw the florist crying quietly in a corner, being comforted by the young waitress Samantha had berated. She saw the wedding coordinator, Helen, speaking into her headset, her face a mask of stress. Samantha's cruelty was a ripple effect, spreading misery throughout the entire event. Disgusted, Emily turned a corner and saw Angela sitting alone in the alcove. She looked so composed, so peaceful, that it made the chaos of the bridal suite seem even more grotesque. Emily hesitated for a moment, then walked over. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Angela opened her eyes and looked up at Emily. She offered a small, sad smile. "I'm fine, dear," she said, her voice steady. "Thank you for asking." What she did, what she said. "It was unforgivable," Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. Angela simply nodded. "Some people can't see past the surface of things," she said, her voice laced with a wisdom that seemed ancient. "They only see what they want to see." The simplicity and grace of Angela's response moved Emily to tears. She sat down next to Angela, a silent gesture of solidarity. The two women sat together for a moment, an unlikely alliance forged in the fire of Samantha's arrogance. The storm cloud that had been forming over the bride was growing darker and more menacing with every passing minute. And Samantha, in her suite, continued to laugh and preen, completely unaware that the world she had so carefully constructed was about to be brought crashing down around her. The time had finally come for the groom to see his bride. Michael Thompson, looking sharp and confident in his tailored tuxedo, made his way towards the bridal suite. He was excited, a nervous energy buzzing just beneath his calm exterior. He was about to marry the woman he loved, the woman he thought he knew. As he approached the suite, he could hear the sound of laughter from within. Samantha's laughter, high and loud. It should have been a happy sound, but something about it felt off, a little too sharp, a little too brittle. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was a flurry of activity as the bridesmaids put the finishing touches on their own appearances. Samantha was standing in front of the full-length mirror, admiring her reflection. She looked stunning in her elaborate white gown, a vision of bridal perfection. But the moment Michael entered, he sensed it. The tension. It was a palpable thing, an invisible current running through the room. The bridesmaids' smiles seemed forced, their movements stiff. The air was thick with something unspoken. "Michael! You're not supposed to see me before the ceremony," Samantha said, feigning a playful pout. She rushed over to him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "It's bad luck." "I just wanted to see you for a minute," he said, smiling and kissing her cheek. But as he held her, he scanned the room. "Everything okay in here? It feels a little tense." Samantha pulled back, her smile tightening almost imperceptibly. "Tense? Don't be silly, darling. It's just the usual pre-wedding jitters. Everyone is a little on edge. We're all just so excited." She waved a dismissive hand. "It's nothing. Just silly bridesmaid drama." She was desperate to hide what had happened, to sweep the entire ugly incident under the rug. The last thing she wanted was for Michael to hear about her confrontation with the hairstylist. In her mind, it was a minor issue that she had handled decisively. It was over. But Michael knew his friends. He caught Emily's eye across the room. She was usually so bubbly and cheerful, but now she looked pale and worried. She gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. It was a clear signal. Something was wrong. "Where's Angela?" Michael asked, looking around. "I thought she was doing your hair." I wanted to thank her. A flicker of panic crossed Samantha's face before she quickly masked it. "Oh, her," she said, her voice dripping with casual disdain. "There was a change of plans." She had to leave. Her work wasn't quite up to par, I'm afraid. But don't worry, we found a replacement. Everything is perfect. Michael's brow furrowed. That didn't sound like Angela. She was a professional, a perfectionist. She just left? Did something happen? Before Samantha could spin another lie, Emily saw her chance. She walked over, pretending to adjust the flower in Michael's lapel. As she fussed with the buttonhole, she leaned in, close, her voice a barely audible whisper meant only for him. "Michael," she said, her voice low and urgent. "You need to talk to Angela. Find her. Ask her what happened." Her eyes were wide with sincerity. "Please, just trust me." With that, Emily stepped back, giving him a quick, meaningful look before melting back into the group of bridesmaids. Michael stood frozen for a second, a cold feeling spreading through his chest. He looked at Samantha, who was now chattering nervously about the seating chart, and then at the closed, anxious faces of the other women in the room. He knew Emily. She wasn't a drama queen. If she said something was wrong, it was. "I'll be right back," he said to Samantha, his voice suddenly cool and clipped. He turned and walked out of the room before she could protest. He found Angela exactly where Emily had left her, sitting quietly in the alcove down the hall. Her hairstyling case was packed and resting at her feet. She was staring straight ahead, her face a mask of calm. But Michael knew her better than anyone else in the world. He could see the deep hurt in her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands that she was trying to still by clenching them in her lap. The sight of her, so alone and so wounded, made something in his chest harden into a cold, solid knot of anger. "Mom," he said softly, using the name he had always called her. He sat down beside her on the bench. "What happened?" "Samantha said you left." Angela finally looked at him, and her carefully constructed composure began to crack. She didn't have to say a word. He saw it all in her face. The humiliation, the pain, the profound disappointment. He gently took her hand, his thumb stroking the calloused skin. These were the hands that had worked 3 jobs to feed him, the hands that had held him when he cried, The hands that had packed his lunches, mended his clothes, and pushed him to be the man he was today. And the woman he was about to marry had insulted them. "Tell me what she did," Michael said, his voice low and dangerous. And so, in a quiet, steady voice, Angela told him everything. She left out no detail, from the initial sneer to the final hateful words. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She simply reported the facts. With every word she spoke, Michael's face grew colder, his expression harder. The love and excitement he had felt just moments before evaporated, replaced by an icy, focused rage. When she was finished, he stood up. He looked down at the woman who was his true family, his anchor, his entire world. "Wait here," he said, his voice quiet but steely. "Don't go anywhere. I'm going to handle this." He turned and walked away, not back towards the bridal suite, but towards a quiet corner of the grand hallway. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his movements sharp and precise. Vindication was coming. Michael's footsteps were silent and purposeful on the thick plush carpet of the hotel hallway. He found a secluded spot near a window overlooking the perfectly manicured gardens, a stark contrast to the ugliness brewing inside. He took a deep, steadying breath, channeling his white-hot anger into a cold, clear plan. Panic and emotion would not serve him now. He needed precision. He needed to be strategic. His thumb moved swiftly over the screen of his phone, scrolling through his contacts. He didn't call his father-in-law-to-be. He didn't call his own friends to vent. He made 2 calls, both to men he trusted implicitly, men who understood action and consequences. The first call was to his best man, David, who was also his lawyer. David answered on the first ring. "Mike, what's up? We're about to line up, man. You ready to do this?" David's voice was cheerful, oblivious. "David, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Michael said, his voice flat and devoid of all emotion. The tone immediately alerted David that something was seriously wrong. "What is it? What happened?" "There's been an incident with Samantha and my mother," Michael said, the word mother, delivered with a firm, deliberate emphasis. "I need you to do something for me, and I need it done quietly and quickly. Go to the tech booth, the guy running the slideshow for the reception. Tell him I have a last-minute video I need to add to the beginning of the presentation. Tell him it's a surprise for the bride and it needs to be queued up and ready to play on my signal. Can you do that for me without asking any questions right now?" There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. David was sharp. He knew Michael's history. He had met Angela many times and respected her immensely. "Consider it done," David said, his own voice now serious. "I'll handle it." "Are you okay?" "I will be," Michael replied. "One more thing. Find Emily Ross, the junior bridesmaid. Tell her I need her to send me whatever she has on her phone. Right now." "Got it," David said, and the line went dead. The second call was to the hotel's head of security, a man Michael had met during the planning stages of the wedding. He had made it a point to establish a good relationship with the senior staff. "This is Michael Thompson in the grand ballroom," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. "I need 2 of your most discreet security officers to be positioned near the altar, but out of sight. I may require assistance in escorting a guest from the premises." "A guest, sir?" the security head asked, confused. "Yes, the bride," Michael said, the words feeling like ice in his mouth. There was another stunned silence. "Sir, I'm not sure I understand." "You don't need to understand," Michael said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Just have your men ready. I'm a guest of this hotel, and I am anticipating a disturbance. Be ready to act on my word." "Yes, sir," the security head replied, the hesitation in his voice replaced by professionalism. Michael hung up. His part was done. The pieces were in place. He then sent a short, simple text to Emily. "David is coming to find you. Send me the video, now." A minute later, his phone buzzed. A video file was downloading. He pressed play. The screen filled with the sickeningly familiar sight of his own bridal suite. And then he heard it. He heard Samantha's voice, shrill and venomous, mocking Angela's hands. He heard her call the woman who raised him filth. He watched her brag, watched her preen, watched her boast about her cruelty to the nodding, sycophantic bridesmaids. He saw it all, and the cold knot of anger in his chest solidified into something akin to granite. There was no more doubt, no more hope, that this was a misunderstanding. This was the real Samantha. The woman he had almost pledged his life to was a monster, a cruel, petty tyrant who got joy from humiliating good people. His love for her, which he had thought was so strong, died in that moment, extinguished by the sheer ugliness of her soul. He forwarded the video file to David with a simple instruction. "Play this." He put his phone back in his pocket. He smoothed down his tuxedo jacket, adjusted his tie. To any onlooker, he would have appeared perfectly calm, the very picture of a confident groom about to walk down the aisle. But inside, a storm of righteous fury was raging. He was no longer a groom preparing for a wedding. He was a son preparing for a reckoning. Angela didn't know it yet, as she sat waiting patiently in the hallway. But her son was about to defend her honor in the most public and devastating way imaginable. The entire wedding, this monument to Samantha's vanity, was about to become the stage for her downfall. The grand ballroom was filled to capacity. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the sea of guests dressed in their finest attire. The air hummed with anticipation and the soft, elegant strains of a string quartet. Everyone was smiling, chatting, fanning themselves with their programs. It was a picture-perfect wedding scene, a tableau of wealth, happiness, and social grace. But beneath the surface, a current of tension was beginning to flow. Vendors whispered in the hallways. The florist, who had been berated, was seen talking animatedly with the wedding planner. The young waitress, who had been dismissed by Samantha, was recounting the incident to a group of catering staff. Rumors of the bride's explosive behavior in the bridal suite were starting to spread like a virus through the behind-the-scenes network of the event. They were just whispers for now, but they were growing louder. Oblivious to it all, Samantha stood at the back of the ballroom, ready to make her grand entrance. Her father stood beside her, beaming with pride. She had composed herself, her earlier rage replaced by a serene, confident smile. She was the star of the show, and her moment had arrived. The music shifted, the great doors of the ballroom swung open, and all heads turned towards her. She walked down the aisle with a practiced, confident grace, her eyes fixed on Michael, who was waiting for her at the altar. She saw his calm expression and mistook it for loving adoration. She saw the guests, their faces upturned and smiling, and she felt a surge of triumph. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as she had planned. She was getting everything she ever wanted: the wealthy, handsome husband, the lavish wedding, the social status she craved. She felt untouchable. As she reached the altar, Michael took her hand. His skin was cool to the touch, but she was too caught up in the moment to notice. She gave his hand a little squeeze, a secret sign of their impending union. He did not squeeze back. The officiant began the ceremony with the traditional words of welcome. Guests settled into their seats, a reverent hush falling over the crowd. Behind the scenes, a quiet, coordinated dance was taking place. David, the best man, gave a subtle nod to the tech booth at the back of the room. The technician, a young man who was now fully aware that he was part of something major, cued the video file. In the wings, two discreet security guards moved into position, their faces impassive. Emily Ross, standing with the other bridesmaids, held her breath, her heart pounding. She had done her part. Now it was all up to Michael. The ceremony proceeded smoothly through the opening remarks and readings. Samantha was radiant, smiling, occasionally turning to look at her adoring audience. She felt like a celebrity, a queen. She was completely unaware of the trap that was about to be sprung. She couldn't see the cold, hard look in Michael's eyes. She couldn't feel the coiled tension in his body. She was floating on a cloud of her own arrogance, deaf and blind to the gathering storm. The moment of truth was approaching, and the entire world she had built for herself was about to come crashing down on live television, in front of everyone she had ever wanted to impress. The silence in the room was the deep, quiet breath before the plunge. The officiant smiled warmly at the couple. "And now," he said, his voice resonating through the grand ballroom, "Michael and Samantha have prepared their own vows, a testament to their unique and special love." He gestured towards Samantha, inviting her to speak first. Samantha turned to face Michael, her eyes shining. She was ready. She had practiced her vows for weeks, memorizing every word, every intonation. But before she could speak, Michael held up a hand, a quiet, simple gesture that immediately commanded the room's attention. "Forgive me," Michael said, his voice clear and steady, amplified by the small microphone on his lapel. He turned to the officiant. "Before we continue, there's something I'd like to share. A short video. A tribute, of sorts." Samantha looked at him, her head tilted in confusion. A tribute? This was not in the script. "A video, darling," she whispered, her smile wavering slightly. "What are you talking about?" "A surprise," Michael said, his eyes locking onto hers. The look in them was not one of love. It was something else, something cold and unreadable that sent a small shiver of unease down her spine. But she was the bride. She was the center of attention. She indulged him, turning to the guests with a playful, magnanimous smile. "It seems my fiancé has a surprise for me," she announced, her voice light. Michael gave a subtle nod towards the back of the room. And in that instant, the world changed. The two large screens on either side of the altar, which had been displaying a tasteful monogram of the couple's initials, flickered to life. But instead of a romantic slideshow of smiling photos, the screens filled with a shaky cell phone video. The image was unmistakable, the opulent chaos of the bridal suite. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. The video was clear, the audio crisp. Samantha's voice, shrill and ugly, filled the silent ballroom. "Look at these hands!" the on-screen Samantha shrieked, her face twisted in a sneer of pure contempt. "They're rough! They're ugly! Ugly hands can't fix my hair!" The guests sat frozen in their seats, jaws dropped, eyes widened in disbelief. They could hear the sickening crash as the cart of hairstyling tools was kicked over. They heard Samantha demand that security throw Angela out. They heard her call the quiet, dignified woman filth and a cleaning lady. Samantha turned pale. The color drained from her face, leaving her perfectly applied makeup looking like a grotesque mask on a statue. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Her mind struggled to process what was happening. This was impossible. How could this be happening? She looked frantically from the screen to Michael, her eyes begging for an explanation, for him to stop it, to make it go away. But Michael just stood there, his expression like stone, forcing her to watch, forcing everyone to watch. The video continued. It showed Samantha after Angela had left, preening and boasting to her bridesmaids. "You have to be willing to put the help in their place," her voice echoed through the hall. "Otherwise they'll walk all over you." She mocked Angela's silence, her race, her presumed social status, all while her bridesmaids offered nervous, sycophantic laughter. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. People were turning to each other, whispering in shocked tones. Samantha's parents, sitting in the front row, looked horrified, their faces a mixture of confusion and shame. This wasn't just a bridezilla moment. This was a revelation of a character so profoundly ugly. It was breathtaking. Samantha began to stammer, her voice a desperate, choked whisper. "Michael, turn it off. Please, turn it off." She tugged at his arm, but he didn't move. He was a statue of righteous judgment. He was making her watch her own soul, stripped bare for all the world to see. The video ended. The screens went black. But the images and sounds hung in the air, a toxic cloud that had poisoned the entire ceremony. A heavy, damning silence fell over the ballroom. In that moment, Samantha was no longer a beautiful, admired bride. She was a villain, exposed in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. She had never in her entire pampered life expected her cruelty to have consequences. She had always believed she was untouchable. But she had made one fatal mistake. She had underestimated the quiet woman she had tried to destroy, and she had completely misunderstood the man she was about to marry. The trap had been sprung, and she was caught in its steel jaws. Into the suffocating silence, Michael's voice cut through the air like a blade. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. Every word was heavy with a cold, righteous fury that commanded the absolute attention of every person in the room. He let go of Samantha's hand, as if it were contaminated. He turned away from her, leaving her standing alone and exposed at the altar, and walked to the edge of the stage. His eyes scanned the crowd until he found who he was looking for. There, sitting in a reserved seat in the third row, a seat he had instructed an usher to lead her to just moments before the ceremony began, was Angela Carter. She looked small and vulnerable in the vast, opulent ballroom, but her back was straight, her head held high. Tears were silently streaming down her face, but they were not tears of shame or humiliation. They were tears of shock, of sorrow, and of a fierce, overwhelming love for the boy she had raised. Michael walked down the few steps from the altar and went directly to her. The crowd watched, mesmerized, as he reached for her hand. The same hand Samantha had called ugly. He held it gently, reverently, and helped her to her feet. He then led her from her seat, through the stunned rows of guests, and up onto the altar with him. He brought her to the very center of the stage, to the spot where he was supposed to have pledged his life to another woman. He stood beside Angela, his arm protectively around her shoulders, and faced the breathless crowd. Samantha, a few feet away, looked on, her face a mask of utter, uncomprehending horror. She was no longer the center of attention. She had been replaced. "For those of you who don't know," Michael began, his voice ringing with power and conviction, "this is Angela Carter." He paused, letting the name settle in the air. "A few of you saw the video. You heard the woman I was about to marry call her a cleaning lady. You heard her mock her hands. You heard her call her filth and have her thrown out." He paused again, his gaze sweeping across the faces of his guests, of Samantha's family, and finally landing on Samantha herself. "What you don't know," he continued, his voice growing stronger, "is that this woman, this black woman you mocked, is not just a hairstylist." He pulled Angela closer to him. 20 years ago, when I lost my parents and had no one, this woman took me in. She worked 3 jobs so that I could eat. She sacrificed everything so that I could have a future. The hands that you called ugly are the hands that fed me, clothed me, and raised me. This woman is not the help. She is my family. She is my hero. She is my mother. The reveal landed like a physical blow. A massive collective gasp, louder and more profound than any before, swept through the ballroom. People rose from their seats, not in protest, but in a spontaneous show of respect. The whispers erupted into a roar of shock and disbelief. This wasn't just a wedding drama anymore. This was a story of love, sacrifice, and poetic justice. Samantha froze. The blood drained completely from her face, leaving her skin a ghastly, chalky white. Her mind simply shut down. It couldn't process the information. Angela? Michael's mother? The cleaning lady? The woman she had kicked and screamed at? It was impossible. It was a nightmare. But it was real. The power dynamic in the room didn't just shift. It shattered into a million irreparable pieces. In a single stunning moment, the humiliated hairstylist had been elevated to the status of a saint, and the beautiful, powerful bride had become the lowest, most despised person in the room. The world had tilted on its axis, and Samantha Miller was in a free fall. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no sound came out. The carefully constructed facade of her life had been obliterated by a single, undeniable truth. Michael's words echoed in her ears. "She is my mother." It was a death sentence. She finally found her voice, a pathetic, strangled whimper. "Michael, I didn't know," she stammered, taking a stumbling step towards him. Her eyes, wide with panic, pleaded with him. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. If I had known who she was, I never would have." She stopped, realizing her mistake too late. Her words, meant to be an apology, were a confession. She was admitting that her kindness was conditional, that her respect was reserved only for those she deemed important. It was the final nail in her coffin. A humorless, bitter laugh escaped Michael's lips. "You never would have what, Samantha?" he asked, his voice dripping with contempt. "You never would have shown your true self? That's the whole point. I know who you are now. Everyone here knows who you are." He looked out at the guests, his expression hard as flint. "The wedding is off," he declared, his voice booming through the silent hall. The words were final, absolute. There was no room for negotiation. "This marriage is over before it even began." He then turned his gaze directly back to Samantha, and his voice dropped to a low, chilling tone. "And as for our relationship, you're fired. From my life." The finality of it all finally broke through Samantha's shock. A raw, animalistic sob tore from her throat. Her knees buckled, and she would have collapsed onto the stage if her father hadn't rushed forward to catch her. She was a ruin, a beautiful sculpture that had been smashed to pieces. The guests stared, a mixture of pity and disgust on their faces. They were witnessing the complete and utter social collapse of a person. Michael turned his back on her, a symbolic act of final dismissal. He faced Angela, his expression softening instantly. He gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry I ever let her get close enough to hurt you." Angela shook her head, pulling him into a fierce embrace. "You have nothing to be sorry for," she whispered back, her voice choked with tears of pride and love. "You are a good man, Michael. You are everything I ever hoped you would be." They clung to each other, a mother and son, an unbreakable bond forged in love and sacrifice, a fortress of two against the world. Samantha, sobbing hysterically in her father's arms, was a ghost at a feast that was no longer in her honor. She was left humiliated, speechless, and utterly, devastatingly alone at the altar where all her dreams were supposed to come true. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Samantha. News of the wedding disaster spread through the city's elite circles like a wildfire. Every guest in that ballroom had a phone, and within minutes, the story of the bride's cruelty and the groom's shocking revelation was being texted, tweeted, and talked about all over town. The video Emily had taken went viral among their social set, forwarded from person to person, a digital scarlet letter that would follow Samantha forever. Business partners of her father who were in attendance were seen shaking their heads in disgust. Friends of Michael's family, powerful and influential people, approached Angela after the ceremony was officially canceled, offering their support and expressing their admiration. They shook her hand, her strong, capable, ugly hand, and spoke to her with a reverence they had never shown Samantha. The power shift was total and absolute. Samantha's father, a man who valued reputation above all else, was mortified. He was seen having a hushed, furious argument with his wife in the lobby. Their daughter's public disgrace was now their own. Deals would be affected. Friendships would be strained. The Miller family name was now associated with a scandal of the most personal and ugly kind. In the days that followed, the consequences mounted. The wedding venue, furious about the disruption and the damage to their reputation, sent the Millers a bill not only for the full cost of the event, but also for damages related to the breach of their staff conduct policies. Vendors who had witnessed Samantha's behavior firsthand shared their stories with others in the industry, and she was effectively blacklisted from the city's top event planners and suppliers. Emily Ross, on the other hand, was hailed as a hero. Michael publicly thanked her for her courage, and many of their mutual friends reached out to praise her for doing the right thing. She had been afraid of Samantha's wrath, but she quickly learned that integrity was a currency far more valuable than social standing. Her bravery had earned her a level of respect she had never imagined. Angela Carter, the woman who had spent her life working in the shadows, was suddenly thrust into the light. She was no longer the invisible help. She was Angela Carter, the woman who had raised Michael Thompson. She was honored, respected, and admired. Michael insisted on throwing a lavish dinner in her honor a week later, inviting all his closest friends and business associates. It was a celebration not of a wedding, but of a mother's love. Angela, dressed in a simple but elegant dress that Michael had bought for her, was the guest of honor, and she radiated a quiet, dignified joy. For Samantha, there was no redemption. She lost more than just a wealthy husband. She lost her reputation, her social circle, and her carefully curated image of perfection. Many of her friends, the same bridesmaids who had laughed nervously at her cruel jokes, abandoned her. They didn't want to be associated with her toxicity. She became a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties and charity galas. Her arrogance had cost her everything. She had believed that her status made her untouchable, but she learned a brutal lesson, that character in the end is the one thing you cannot buy, and once it is publicly destroyed, it can never be rebuilt. The world she had worshipped, a world of surface-level appearances and material wealth, had turned on her and cast her out. She was left with nothing but the ugly truth of who she really was. In the quiet aftermath, long after the whispers had faded and the dramatic scenes had played out, Michael and Angela found their peace. They sat together on the back porch of the small, humble house Angela still refused to leave, the same porch where she had helped him with his homework so many years ago. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and purple. Michael reached over and took his mother's hand, holding it in both of his. He traced the lines and calluses on her palm, not with pity but with a deep and profound gratitude. These hands were a roadmap of his life, a testament to her sacrifice. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet, "for everything." Angela squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "There is nothing to thank me for, Michael. Loving you was never a choice. It was a privilege." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the last of the light fade from the sky. The narrator's voice, calm and full of wisdom, delivers the lasting moral of the story. True beauty is not found in polished appearances, manicured nails, or expensive dresses. It is not in a flawless face or a perfect wedding. True beauty is in the heart that raises, the heart that loves, the heart that sacrifices without asking for anything in return. Arrogance may glitter for a moment. It may demand attention and command fear, but it is a fragile, hollow thing. Dignity, on the other hand, is quiet. It is resilient. It is a light that can never be extinguished, and in the end it outshines everything else, forever. The audience is left with this inspiring thought, reminded that the people who are so often underestimated, the ones who work behind the scenes, often carry the greatest strength and the most profound power of all. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.